What is up YouTube, it's B4Flex. In this video, I'm going to be talking about South Asian genetics in regards to sports. Why am I doing this video? Well, because this has been highly requested for literally years, over 2 years. Since I made that roll race based on sports video, so many people have requested this video. Even before I made that video, while I was making that video, many people requested it. However, I didn't cover it because there's not a lot of representation in sports for South Asians, and I'll go into that a bit later on in this video, but that is why. Alongside that, there are a lot of negative comments or views that people have on this topic, right? I see that in my comment section, I see that in memes as well, in shorts and stuff like that. So I thought, you know what, let me clarify it so people can put some respect on these genes. Disclaimer: if you are a racist, get lost. I don't want you here, right? Now I want to say this means any racist of any color, any race, all right? Just do whatever you want elsewhere, just don't be in this video and in this comment section, okay? We don't need you here. Alongside that, if you are sensitive, you know, you don't want to talk about topics like these, then cool, you know, you probably shouldn't watch this video. You can, of course, but proceed at your own risk. You have been warned. South Asians, who am I referring to? I'm referring to people from India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and so forth. That area. So not Middle Easterns, right? I'm referring to South Asians, all right? Just so you understand. I know that's like a southern part of technically Asia as well, but that's not who I'm referring to. Now, I do appreciate that there is a lot of genetic diversity in this area, but I'm simply referring to sports and what they do have in common and what the role that their genes that they do have in common plays in sports. Lack of representation. Well, apart from cricket, if you look at sports like rugby, football, basketball, boxing, MMA, athletics, powerlifting, or bodybuilding, they are not represented that much. Now, in particular, let me speak about bodybuilding. Why? Because that's the main reason people have been commenting about this. When people talk about South Asian genetics, they're not really talking about sports. They're not talking about basketball, you know, football, all of that. They're mainly talking about bodybuilding, their ability to build muscle or lean mass, basically. If you look at the Mr. Olympia, they aren't represented like that. Now, let's zoom back into cricket. Cricket is a sport that India absolutely dominate. Now, is cricket a sport where athleticism is at the forefront? Not necessarily. However, it is quite telling in regard to culture. You know, for example, Jamaicans dominate athletics. Is that because they don't have the genetics to do good in figure skating? No, it's just that they focus on athletics. It's a massive cultural thing for them as well. You know, athletics is very, very important. Like track stars in Jamaica are like NBA stars in America, or football stars in the UK. So it gives you a little insight into their culture, into things that they focus on or that they value as a people. Alongside that, at the Olympics, they're not crazy highly represented. That being said, Pakistan did set the Olympic world record in the men's javelin. All right, so there is like here and there, you know, a little bit of representation, but not that crazy dominance, I wouldn't say, in the Olympics, but there is some representation. This isn't the most telling, of course. Sometimes the income of a country, you know, tells how much they would invest in, you know, the Olympics or in sports in general. India, for example, they do perform all right. They used to perform quite good in field hockey, something that I would say that they actually, you could argue that they dominated, you know, at the Olympics to a degree in field hockey, but this was for a time. Wrestling is something that they do perform okay in as well. They do frequently medal in wrestling. This is something that could also be a cultural thing yet again, because they have wrestling, that their own forms of wrestling. You know, I know in particular Indian wrestling, they have their own little style of wrestling that they do over there. And so this could play a role as to why they don't focus too much on different sports where there's not that much representation on the world scale, because they have their own sports that they are fixated on, you know. So I just wanted to put that out there. But overall, in popular sports, they are underrepresented most of the time. Why is that? Well, natural selection. Right, so let's talk about natural selection, just like a quick overview, just to explain a little bit. Natural selection, basically the best suited traits for whatever environment will survive. It's that simple. It doesn't make the traits superior to other traits. It just makes them better suited. So for example, if for whatever reason the supermarket put all the food really high up, so you had to be 6 feet tall to be able to reach the food, then you might find that unless you're 6 feet tall or in the same house as someone who's 6 feet tall, you won't be able to eat. So as a result, you won't survive. So only people who are 6 feet tall will end up being able to survive. Natural selections. That's really a dumb example. Let's look at the animal kingdom. The snowshoe hare, right? They change their fur color. So as winter approaches, they shed their brown fur and they start getting white fur. this happens to be advantageous because they're able to blend into the white snow with their white fur, and therefore they're less visible to predators. They blend in more, right? As spring approaches, they shed their white fur and they grow brown fur, right? Yet again, advantageous because they blend in more with the brown ground, right? So they didn't intentionally do this, just those hares that happen to have the genes that made them do this happen to survive, and those that didn't have those genes happen to die out. So that's natural selection. The genes that were best suited to that environment happen to survive. Something interesting that's actually happening right now as a result of global warming, there's not as much snow in certain regions, yet their fur, they still shed their brown fur and grow white fur, and as a result they stand out a lot more. Why is this happening? Well, because this change is actually triggered by daylight hours. It's nothing to do with the snow. It's not intentional. It was just a random thing that was advantageous to some hares, and therefore they survived, meanwhile the others died. So they will have to make adaptations towards this current environment, right? Those who happen to have the genes that don't change fur color, that just stay brown year round, might end up being the ones that survive. So you understand, that's how natural selection works. Same thing happens to black people's hair. You know, black people or Africans or people just in hot climates, there's a reason people in like the Philippines look like they're African, sub-Saharan Africans, meanwhile they're not, right? Because their hair ends up being a bit curly. Why is it curly? Well, because it's an adaptation to enable them to not like overheat their cranium, like their skull, their brain doesn't overheat as a result of the hair being all coily, right? So it protects their head, basically protects their cranium, right? It's just an adaptation. It's not because it's better than straight hair or it's worse than straight hair. It just happens to be an adaptation, right? This doesn't happen as much in today's day and age because, like, let's say you had straight hair and you lived in a hot country and the sun was just beating down on your head, you're not going to die. You're going to buy a hat, right? You know what I mean? Like, you're going to take other precautions. You're going to have air conditioning, stuff like that, right? You're going to be cool. So this doesn't happen anymore. If you're born with a crazy genetic defect, when you're born and you're disabled, basically, you have to operate using a wheelchair or whatever. Back in the day, sorry to say, but you would just pass away, right? Like you wouldn't, your genes wouldn't pass on. It would end with you. Whereas in today's day and age, we have wheelchairs, right? Back in the day, you didn't. If you couldn't hunt, you couldn't hunt. You couldn't help out whatever society you were living in or whatever group of people you were living in. Whereas now, you're able to, right? You're able to, there's wheelchair accessible, even ways to drive and stuff like that, I think. So as humans, it's not that deep anymore. Even like with dogs, you see like pugs, they're not well adapted, but I'm just ranting on about natural. You get the point. Now, natural selection in reference to South Asian genetics that are relevant in sports. Famine. South Asians as a group of people have experienced over 30 major famines, and a lot of these famines occurred in the span of 200 years, less than that time in fact. Now, in case you don't really deep the severity of what I'm saying, like famines, let me really just explain a little bit of the details of two famines, just two major famines that this area experienced, right? The Great Bengal Famine of 1770 killed up to 10 million people in the space of less than 2 years. All right, so please understand, that's up to 10 million people. You know, it varies the numbers that they say, but up to 10 million people in the space of 2 years. The Chalisa famine, right? I have a Chalisa or Chalisa, I apologize if I'm not pronouncing this correct, of 1783 to 1784. So 1 year, up to 11 million people died. That's more than the population of Portugal. That's 2 times the population of Norway today. Now, the results of surviving such famines, right? You have to understand natural selection. So what genes, what people were best suited to survive these famines? Number one, people with a smaller frame, so shorter people with less muscle. Understand this, muscle is not advantageous when thinking calorically, right? If you have a low amount of calories available, you don't have a bunch of food, muscles are detrimental. Muscles increase your resting metabolic rate. So the amount of calories that you burn in one day without even moving, if you just laid in bed, are increased just by having muscle. So muscle is not advantageous if you're going through a famine, right? So as a result, the people that would survive were the people with less amount of muscle mass. Alongside that, people who were shorter, the smaller frame, less calories needed. Yet again, Shaquille O'Neal is not as well adapted to a famine as Kevin Hart. I mean, he does have some stored energy, right, on his body, but in general, he's so tall, he's not as well adapted as someone like Kevin Hart is. Along with that, insulin resistance. Insulin is a hormone that allows the cells in your body to store glucose that's in your blood, right? Your blood glucose. For example, your muscles. If you might have experienced this, right? If you've eaten a whole bunch of carbs, if you've not eaten a bunch of carbs, you end up looking quite depleted, quite flat, because there's not a lot of glycogen stored in your muscle. You end up looking quite flat. People in ketogenic diets, I know that myself, end up looking quite flat. Whereas when you have eaten a bunch of carbs, you end up filling up. It's kind of like you just powered up, right? You went Super Saiyan. Your physique looks a lot bigger, right? You're not as drained, basically, right? Your muscles look fuller. That's glycogen that's stored in your muscles. That's why people carb load and stuff like that. All of that is thanks to insulin. Now, insulin resistance leads to your body not working right. So as a result, your body can't use that insulin. So the blood glucose isn't absorbed by the cells. And rather, a lot of it is just stored as body fat. The same food that might store as glycogen in somebody else's muscles is stored as body fat in somebody else. They didn't even have a chance to burn that energy. That is insanely beneficial when dealing with starvation, right? You have a whole bunch of energy stored so that you can deal with it. You don't need to store the energy as fuel in your muscles. You store the energy as stored energy in your body, all right? So that's extremely advantageous. But of course, in today's day and age, it's not that advantageous. In fact, this is the reason that South Asians have the highest rates of type 2 diabetes. If a group of people survive one famine, or basically if a famine occurs in an area, the people who happen to survive are people who are adapted. And as a result, if a nation goes through a famine, then the offspring of that nation will be 2 times as likely to get type 2 diabetes. All right, so famine is the leading cause of that for this group of people. It was advantageous once upon a time, but right now it's not that advantageous, right? It's not advantageous, full stop. Especially with the modern diets that people are eating. Most people of different groups of people, especially when they live in Western countries, eat very similar diets, despite the fact that our bodies didn't adapt to very similar environments. So as a result, you have people who are shorter on average, right? That's more energy efficient. People who store more energy, right? People who have more fat, higher body fat percentage, and people who have less muscle. This isn't that advantageous when you're looking at sports, is it? Or in particular sports, right? Like bodybuilding, they're not going to be as prone to building as much lean mass as a result. However, this is extremely advantageous, of course, when dealing with starvation. They are starvation adapted, but not necessarily sports adapted, or adapted in a way that happens to conveniently be beneficial for sports. Now I'm talking on average, guys, on average. This doesn't mean everybody is like this. This is on average. Okay, so there is a higher percentage of people living in these areas that have these genetics. This isn't everyone. For example, when speaking on like skeletal frame, speaking of height, the average height in India, for example, is like 5'6". But out of the 5 Indians that I'm acquainted with, I've some of them are friends, some are just acquaintances. 2 of them are short, from what I recall. One of them is around average height, and the other 2 are tall. 2 of them, I believe, are like 6 feet, and one is like maybe 6'1", if I'm not mistaken. So this isn't representative of absolutely everyone. Also, culture has an impact. South Asians, in particular, are not that focused on pursuing sports professionally, right? Or even amateurs, right? Like Olympic stuff like that. They're not that fixated on pursuing that. They're more fixated on academics. We all know that. It's even a meme, you know? It's the same in like Nigerians. If you look at Nigerians, if you want to tell your Nigerian mom or dad that you want to be a boxer, for example, you better have your head movement together, because that slipper is going to be thrown from every single angle possible, right? And the same is the situation with South Asians. They highly excel in academics. Highly. They are among the highest earners as well. So they don't fixate on sports. They don't fixate on professional sports, amateur sports, whatever. They don't fixate on that. They fixate on academics. And as a result, they won't be as represented in sports, because that's not something that they care about culturally, right? Whereas if you're part of a culture, you look at track and field, look at sprinting in particular. Jamaicans, they dominate that. There is a cultural impact of that. Of course, there's genetics as well, but culture also plays a role. Why are so many kickboxing world champions from Holland or the Netherlands? Culture, right? Culture plays a massive role. If your culture don't care that much about sports, then your people likely are not going to be that represented in sports, right? It's that simple. If your culture cares more about sports and less about academics, then your people are not going to dominate in academics. Here are 2 examples of South Asian men that might give you some motivation and inspiration. Number 1, Hamza. He's a YouTuber who covers like self-improvement. He's a South Asian man. I believe he's from Pakistan. Like originally he's a Pakistani man, British of course, like born if I'm not mistaken. And he was actually skinny fat growing up. If I'm not mistaken, I believe I'm correct. He was skinny fat. He was just the average guy. Wasn't some athletic phenom, some athletic freak. Wasn't athletic, full stop. Just the average guy. He decided to work out. Didn't feel limited by his genetics. I don't even think he fixated on that at all. I don't even think he thought anything good or bad of his genetics, and just decided to start working out. He started eating right, lifted, was training for a while. If I'm not mistaken, he also did a carnivore diet for some time, if I'm not mistaken. But long story short, he built an amazing physique that most men would be happy to have. Most men would dream to have that physique, right? Most men can't actually achieve that physique, to be real, right? But he built that, right? A South Asian man, as I said, not some genetic phenom. I'm not speaking about some outlier. I'm speaking of someone who grew up skinny fat, worked out really hard, was disciplined, dieted, and look at his physique. Amir Khan, right? I know this is like night and day differences when speaking about like athleticism, but Amir Khan, at one point unified light welterweight world champion, Olympic silver medalist, having lightning fast hand speed. He was British born Pakistani. Imagine if he felt limited by, I guess it wasn't that common, to speak about that. There wasn't that many memes and comments like that. But imagine if he felt limited, thinking, oh man, I'm not that athletic. I don't see that many South Asians doing sports. Imagine if he felt that limited. Then Britain wouldn't have had such an amazing champion. So let these men motivate you. Do not be discouraged. Be empowered with this knowledge. Understanding your genetics is extremely advantageous. You understand what works well for you. You know your strengths and your weaknesses. So use that to optimize everything in your life, optimize your pursuits in life. Don't necessarily, you can of course do whatever you like to do, but don't necessarily just waste time doing things that you're not good at. Do things where you do have an advantage. You want to fixate on things that you're good at. Know your strengths. Don't have this weakened mindset of, you can do anything as long as you put your mind to it. You can't. Not everybody can do everything, right? You have to be good at it. Good luck telling Kevin Hart he's going to end up in the NBA. It's very, 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 very unlikely, right? Whereas if he happened to be 7 feet tall, it would be very likely, right? But should he waste his time trying his best to pursue something that he's not the most gifted in? No. Look at your strengths. So be empowered by this knowledge. Use this knowledge to know what you are good at, rather than fixate on trying to do something that you're not the most blessed in. That being said, do whatever the heck you want to do, all right? Don't let averages control you. For one, you might be an outlier. You never know. You might be an outlier. So I'm out here saying this and that, for the average, but you might be an outlier. So the average doesn't even apply to you. But even if you are average, right, I can give you all this advice. Kevin Hart likely wouldn't have ended up in the league. But guess what? Muggsy Bogues ended up in the league, and he's shorter than Kevin Hart, I think. So imagine if Kevin Hart felt limited because of his height, and then he sees someone else who just decided to not feel limited and decided to outwork his competition, and he ended up in the league. All right, so don't let yourself feel limited based on that. And as I said, you never know. You could be an outlier. Who would have thought that a Chinese man would run the fastest ever 60-meter split whilst running 100 meters? Who would have thought that? He was an outlier. Now, if he thought, oh man, I'm not Jamaican, I'm not black, I'm not going to end up running that fast in 100 meters, we would have never had that record be broken. We would have never known that a Chinese man was capable of that. So yeah, don't let yourself be limited. Do also understand, you could be an outlier. You might not be an outlier, you might be average, but yet again, if you push yourself, you never know. If you dare to be great, you never know. You don't have to be above average genetically to dare to be great. You just need the work ethic to dare to be great. Remember, talent beats hard work when talent works hard. But most people with talent do not work hard, right? So hard work most definitely can get you there. Now, that being said, not everyone's going to take this extreme approach anyway, so I want to give you guys some advice. Now, how can you work with your genes in mind? All right, so I'm going to discuss how you can work training in general for fitness, health, just in general, just for lifestyle. Also bodybuilding, although I don't recommend people bodybuild, right? If you do want to build an aesthetic physique, I'll also give you advice on that. Alongside that, if you want to pursue sports, if you want to do that for a career, or you really want to pursue sports, right? How you can approach that with understanding of your genetics. So number one, training in general. Don't focus on looks. I don't think anyone should. Doesn't matter wherever you're from, whatever your genetics are. I don't think anyone should just focus on looks. I think that's it's just not the best pursuit in my personal opinion. Focus on things like strength, things like skill, right? You might not be as strong as Larry Wheels, but you'll see your numbers go up. and that'll make you happy. Even things like skill, train calisthenics. I love calisthenics. You know, you don't have to have the best genetics in the world to be able to hold a handstand. You know what I mean? It's a skill. You don't need to be having the best genetics in the world to be able to do muscle ups or hold a front lever, right? It's just a skill. So train skills rather than fixating on your looks. However, if you do want to focus on looks, you want to focus on bodybuilding, aesthetics, eat higher protein. Fixate on higher protein. Now, of course, this is hard if you happen to be vegan, right? But or vegetarian, but ideally higher protein, right? Focus on that high protein. Potentially also do full body workouts. South Asians also have high myostatin activity, and the number one way to reduce myostatin naturally is through working out. Compound movements and full body movements or full body workouts in general reduce myostatin the most. So full body workouts, try a higher frequency training protocol as well so you can reduce your myostatin. All right, and alongside that, don't bulk. There's no point in you bulking. You already have enough. Let's just say, right, if you are skinny fat right now, you have enough body fat, so there's no point in you just thinking, all right, cool, I'm gonna go on a massive calorie surplus, because you're not doing anything good for you. So don't bulk. Focus on actually just main gaining, right? You have enough stored calories basically. So just focus on training. Don't focus on, you know, adding a whole bunch of like fat to your body because you're seeing it works for so and so. It might not work that well with you. It's not the healthiest for you to do, right? So just focus on building muscle. If you're looking to train for sports, if you happen to not be an outlier, you might be an outlier, and if you're an outlier, then this doesn't apply to you. But if you happen to, you notice you're skinny fat, you have a low amount of muscle mass, you don't have a bunch of fast twitch muscle fibers either, then don't pick a sport that's based off athletics. Like, don't pick a sports where you have to be an athletic freak in nature, right? Don't pick basketball, don't pick American football, rugby, stuff like that. Pick skill-based sports, right? Things like football, like is in like soccer if you're American, right? Worldwide football, basically. Things like martial arts, right? You don't have to hit the hardest to be a great boxer. There's plenty of boxers that didn't hit that hard. You don't have to be the strongest to do jiu-jitsu. Of course, it can be advantageous, but you don't have to be, right? Pick things like that. Pick MMA. Some people are genetic freaks and pick sports where they can carry their athleticism through in that sport. However, you can be a grappling based person, someone who's got amazing striking, right? If you got long range, work on that. Be in a lighter weight class, stuff like that. Play tennis, ping pong, I don't know, right? But you know what I'm saying, right? Sports that are based more on skill rather than athletics, right? Rather than athletic performance, where you don't just have to be extremely strong, just extremely big, extremely fast, extremely powerful. Rather than that, focus on sports where you have to be very skilled in that sport, where that's what matters most. That's all, folks. I hope you enjoyed the video. A big shout out to a tall and handsome Indian man called Rajan for helping me out in the process of making this video. Thank you, bro. If you want sources, check the description box. The reason I ever became intrigued by genetics is because of the GOAT Team 3D Alpha. So check out his channel. He drops gems on genetics, testosterone, and self-improvement. So if any of that interests you, check him out. For training programs, for strength, bodybuilding, calisthenics, jump training, and boxing, visit my website, www.b4flex.co.uk. Also linked in the description box. I've got great training regimens, and it's a way to support the channel. For all my Indians, Bod Shukriya for watching the video. Thank you all. It's B4Flex, and I'm out.